Hi, my name is Ken Lasseson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription website, and today I want to talk about the challenge of data from studies and do a bit of explaining and give some examples of the nature of the problem. This partially came out of actually two things. One was somebody on a Facebook group was saying, no, your site is all wrong. It says such and such is going to increase E. coli. Here is a study I found saying it decreases. Your site is wrong. I pointed out to them that if you go to the site and look at the citations, you find that I think in this case it was 10 studies cited. 8 of them said it would increase. 2 said it would decrease. And I think I even used the word on the site. The consensus is it would increase. Doesn't mean it's absolute, but often people are, how should I say, fixated on a single answer, equivalent to saying, okay, if I buy this stock, will I have tenfold return in 2 years? It's possible you may, or you may have no value left at all after 2 years. The problem is you are looking for certainty in an uncertain world. My training is in mathematics, probability, and statistics. I work professionally as a statistician. Also work professionally as a artificial intelligence engineer and a data scientist, which means I look at things slightly different. And when it comes to things such as the microbiome, it gets extremely complicated, to put it absolutely simply. And let's, for example, for today's example, I want to point out a couple of things. One is many substances only have a few studies done with it, and sometimes in a very specialized thing. For example, this particular thing is only being studied for kids with autism. It causes their bacteria to shift in one particular way. Now, does that apply to somebody who is diabetic? Who knows? We don't know. If we don't use those autism studies, we have no information. If we use autism studies, we have some information. Now comes the question of how do you merge, assemble, evaluate a whole host of fragmentary information. In general, the assumption I make, which is a reasonable one, is fragmentary information is superior to no information. Perfect information is ideal, but unless we don't have it. Okay, now, to illustrate some of the problems, I'm going to go over to a study from last year dealing with berberine. Berberine happens to be very well studied, which is sweet. Well-studied things, you can get a lot of information about it. And down below, if we go down to it, we find we have a nice collection of tables there, and if we say open up in a new table, we can go and we can see, actually we don't even need that, we can do it on screen. We see the name of the study, what it was done, what dosage was used, and then a reference to the actual study. Now if you go down and take a look at it, and you say, oh, increase the Akkermansia, you could at that point in time simply say, okay, that's it, and answers there. There's never Akkermansia. And as you go down the list, you will Akkermansia. Oh, what? Wait a minute. This study says Akkermansia went down. Another study saying Akkermansia go down. Wait a minute. Does it go up or does it go down? Well, I'm a statistician. I said, okay, there's a probability of it going up and going down. And on a simple naive aspect, I would say, how many times does it go down? I see 2 there. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 times go up. So we have 5 versus 2, which means by consensus, it will go up. Doesn't mean it always will go up. Now, we can do that for tons and tons of things. This particular study is nice because it gives you a whole long list, and you can suddenly say, wait a minute, it says it goes one way here and goes another way there. And you could start digging into all of the differences of the study. Sometimes it's the technique you use for microbiome analysis. Sometimes it's other things. Sometimes it's a particular type of mouse being used for the study. So it's going to be all over the place. For example, oh, this is for our anxiety mouse, it goes up, etc. Now, whether it applies to you, we could go and start saying, oh, wait a minute, are you an anxious person? Have you been diagnosed with an anxiety condition? In which case, we could add that to information about you. The problem I have is that if I start taking personal health information, I immediately become subject to HIPAA regulations and overhead, and that is expensive overhead. Running a free site or trying to be as free as I can, I don't want to have to go and fork out money for HIPAA reviews and additional having to upgrade my hardware and software and everything else to be HIPAA compliant. Hence, I try to absolutely minimize information about personal health information. So we can see here where we have different things. Now, if you go down to human studies, which we have a small number, we have a whole ton of animal study, and most of the time data is coming from animal studies. Why? Because usually a human study can take 5 to 10 years to do, and since microbiome analysis is only being out for less than a decade, you're not going to get very many studies there. So what here we have a couple of things, and some cases it says what the combination of things is, but you can see the information here is very, very sparse compared to the information up here, where we have page after page after page after page of information to work from. So that's basically the problem, is we get contradictory results from different types of studies. We could go ultra conservative and insist we only use human studies, in which case you go from a stack here down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then require only will apply if the person has the same medical condition that the person has. Wait a minute, there's no identical conditions here. In other words, if you are diabetic, there's only one study on it, and it doesn't actually say what change. It simply says it gets changed by this one. So in other words, it's fed by this particular bacteria will consume it, so it would grow. That's all we know. So we end up with literally nothing. If you don't have any of those conditions here, for example, you have long COVID, no information. Sorry, there's nothing we can do about your microbiome. And that is what happens very quickly. The more rigorous you want to have your data, the more rigorous you want your data, the fewer and fewer items go. My training is in statistics and probability in something called operation research or management science. So I'm accustomed to working off probabilities and fuzzy data and how to build algorithms using fuzzy data to give good results. And that's effectively what I've done through my years of developing it, particularly with something which is referred to as cross-validation. So if you go to the advanced page, I have a few things which are cross-validated, which means you select the medical conditions and you get a gut report. And now the gut report is in two parts. Once it finishes loading up, the first part is identifies your bacteria shifts against that reported for the conditions. Then it goes and
family time starts in 10 minutes.
And then goes and applies the algorithms and all the data we have and say, what should you be taking? And now for everything that's listed that you should be taking, there is a link to a study showing that it helps. In other words, these are things which, according to the microbiome, according to our algorithm, you should be taking to make yourself better. But at the same time, those things agree with what is being studied in clinical studies to make you better, or at least to reduce symptoms. So what we have here, as you can see, is we have a pretty impressive list of things which we computed to take, which have all supported as being wise to take from clinical studies on humans. So the algorithm was evolved and tuned with that being the goal. We wanted agreement between what is suggested from bacterial shift and what has been found clinically to help people with certain conditions. We don't have to have effective studies on what helps people with certain bacterial shifts, but we do have it on conditions. The fact that we get a rather massive amount of agreement between the two means that the algorithms are likely very good. My balancing juggling act with all these fragments of information and how I put them together comes out with a result which seems to be pretty solid. Probably far better than anybody randomly trying to work from memory. Oh, I think this may help. Oh, I think that may help. Oh, or worse, like an influencer saying, this is the cure all for all your gut problems. Tell me, I tried it, it works for me. Sample size of 1 versus sample size of many. I don't buy it. Okay, so that is basically, let's do one more thing. Here is a case of looking at something like exercise. And there we have difference here. And what we picked this particularly is that this was looking at the impact of exercise. And if we look at overweight people and lean men, notice that the direction of microbiome shift for the same bacteria is different based on where the person starts. And that's the second issue. Your existing bacteria determines whether or not a particular modifier will have an impact on you, which makes things even more complicated because sometimes we have that information documented, most of the times we don't. So it's again a nice example here, and you can go down through a variety of lists, and where you find this type of table is often well worth browsing through it because you will see, wait a minute, things disagree here. One side says one thing, one side says something else. Often the difference is based on control. One thing which I've found in many studies, in a small number of studies, is they don't talk about increasing or decreasing. They talk about normalizing. In other words, this condition causes things to go high. This condition causes things to go low. And when you take the substance, it brings it down, or when you take the substance, it brings it up. Unfortunately, very few studies give that type of clarification. So instead of being increase and decrease, it's sweet normalize, which is a much better way of doing it. The algorithm I'm using and how I'm doing the balancing, we get pretty close to look at normalization because in general, if you're high, you want to reduce it. If you're low, you want to increase it, and we work on that basis. So the algorithm basically will actually exclude some things which we probably could have some data on, but in general, we are working in pretty broad brushstrokes. Okay, so that is basically it. Let's do a quick recap. One is people will say I have things wrong because they found one study saying something contrary to what the consensus is on microbiome prescription. Fine, have a good day. Go and check all of the references on microbiome prescription and see whether or not I have added up the study correctly or incorrectly. And if I have misquoted any of the studies, please drop me an email so I can correct it. My long-term estimate is the data is 90% correct. It looks like it's probably be closer to 95 to 98% correct, but occasionally errors are found. Whenever there are, I proceed to double check and correct the error. But that depends on people checking it. The person who enters data is not the person who should check the entry. And that's up to you, if you're using the site, to use it. So, second thing is, once we get the data from it, we have the problem of what to do. Do we use animal studies? Which particular type of animal study do we use or we don't use? Do we work on human studies only? how accurately do we match your conditions with the study in a condition? And frequently it's problematic. From the legal point of view, we entering an area bordering on personal health information, which is problematic. The other thing is that the amount of data available is so sparse, it's not worth a pretty significant overhead of getting that data in. There is one firm I know of who I'm consulting with who is attempting to do that. They happen to have some good funding from venture capitals. Whether or not they have enough funds, enough people, and they have good people. They have many PhD students and some recent PhD graduates doing data entry and analysis. Whether or not they can do it to the rigorous standard they would like to be able to do it in the next 5 to 10 or 15 years is, I have no idea. For my side, I ended up having to make a lot of decisions to keep it reasonable for a single person, little me, despite the fact that I'm a high functioning artistic person. I hence don't get bored out of my mind like most people will. And be able to maintain and keep it up to date or pretty up to date is a challenge. So I made decisions to give the best information I have with the resources I have available. People could do better. I encourage improvement. I prefer somebody to come out there with a better site than mine, ideally free, or even if not free, paid, but with better quality information. So that is basically it. We end up taking the information, using my expertise doing decision science, expert systems, artificial intelligence, probability statistics, a whole bunch of fancy mathematical skills, which seems to produce pretty good sets of suggestions, as in what is suggested for somebody with a particular type of shift based on bacteria alone tends to be in good agreement to what clinical studies have shown helps somebody with the identical same condition, which means it's sweet. It is what I love to use the word is cross-validated, as in we have a pretty good odds of it being correct. Not perfect, good odds. And of course, everything should be reviewed by MD before starting anything. Okay, at this point in time, I think I'll shut up because I've been meandering on. But that explains a little bit about the mechanics and the research going into microbiome prescription. And as a FYI, in terms of rules for our expert system, we are over 2.5 million rules at the moment and growing. So there's a lot of information to work from. A lot of stuff is working by inference, which is fine if you're dealing with probability. If you get rid of inference, then suddenly you get a relatively small amount of data to work from, and you may get practically no data. And I don't view a low data suggestions as being as reliable as a high volume of data based on inference doing it. No evidence to support that, just professional experience. Okay, I'll shut up and let you get on to things. Bye.